everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. This is our show where we review the magic stories. Again, it has been a while because I again messed up the intro the first time through on this one. But this week we are here to review our first part of War of the Spark Forsaken by Greg Weisman. This will be part one of what is likely to be 3, but we reserve the right to change that if things come up over the next few weeks of us reading this, etc. But for part 1, I don't know that it's... Can we do a quick review at the top for part 1? Part 1 starts off a little rough, but there are some redeeming factors. We'll talk more about it in the video itself. I don't know that I can accurately tell you whether or not you should read the book first, especially because there's a monetary requirement along with it, whereas in the past it was like, it's free, just go read it, who cares? There's been a lot. Do you have a quick review before I keep going?
I don't know.
It's tough. This one's very tough to use our typical... format standard of review on. So, yeah, that's fair. Bear with us, I guess. What I will say is, up at the top, just for people who are not aware of how we reviewed War of the Spark Ravnica, it's going to be the same as how we review War of the Spark Forsaken. You may have seen online, in general, people having discussions about this book. Heated discussions. Angry discussions. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. And we have not gotten to the part of, at least for this video, right? We haven't gotten to the part of the story that has the offending language in it that the majority of people had an issue with. I would say the majority of people, that's, I haven't run the numbers,
or
but...
The main one.
Right. The biggest problem. That's not part of this part 1. But what I will say is we have gone into this, as we've gone into every magic story, with an open mind.
Right. We've tried.
we try our best, right? We are somewhat biased in that we've read the prior stories. Is that a bias? I mean, for these stories, we would argue that it is a bias because it means that we feel that we know these characters well enough to say what we think is or is not appropriate characterization. And we've talked about that many times.
Well, and we're comparing it to how good the other stories are.
Correct.
Versus how good this is.
Correct.
Which is kind of not a comparison.
Right. But we are giving it a chance. We are going to do our best to give it the benefit of the doubt. If we have questions of things that were questionable, I should say, we will call that out. If we find things that we thought were good, we're going to say that as well. So please don't think that you're coming here for one or the other, where we're going to be 100% positive or 100% negative. It will be neither of those. So if that is something that you're looking for, I apologize, but this is not the video for you. Because there are positive and negative things that we've written down about this story. So, and again, this is part 1 of 3. The book is nicely split up into part 1, part 2, part 3, or act 1, act 2, act 3, however the book chooses to describe it, but still, and we will be attempting, again, doing our best to review it in that same way. And again, if things change, we will change it up. But let's start with talking about the title. War of the Spark Forsaken.
One of my least favorite parts.
I'll agree with that. In fact, you know what? I brought the book over. Why don't I just read from the back jacket of the book?
Ugh. Sorry.
This is just the back here, just the back of the book. The red text up at the top says, "The hunt for Liliana Vess is on in the aftermath of the War of the Spark." So that's the kind of overarching thing. Now we have the black text here that is supposed to, as most books would do, describe the book to you. And again, remember I prefaced this by saying, let's talk about the title, which is War of the Spark Forsaken. So maybe perk your ears up if you hear the word Forsaken on this back page here. I'll begin. The Planeswalkers have defeated Nicol Bolas and saved the multiverse, though at grave cost. The living have been left to pick up the pieces and mourn the dead. But one loss is almost too great to bear. Gideon JaAR, champion of justice and shield of the Gatewatch, is gone. As his former comrades, Jace and Chandra, struggle to rebuild from this tragedy, their future, like the future of the Gatewatch, remains uncertain. So first of all, let's take that first paragraph, because Forsaken's not there yet, but we'll get there. His companions, or his former comrades, Jace and Chandra. I guess because Nissa left, right? When she left to go back to Zendikar, she kind of ended her oath. Like, she's like, my watch is over. But
I mean, Jace was gone for a while too.
But he never right, but he never gave away his oath, he just lost his memories. So arguably, when he regained them, he was, as far as he was concerned, still a member of the Gatewatch. Yeah. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one, that Nissa technically left. She said, my watch is over, and she left. She showed back up, but whatever. But that also means that, like, they're only using Jace and Chandra here because those are the two who've been with Gideon since the beginning. Because obviously, that doesn't include Ajani, Teferi, and based on this book, Kaya as well, because Kaya took JaAR. The oath. JaAR is not a member of the Gatewatch. She did not take her oath.
That's true.
But Kaya took her oath at the end of the last book. Mm-hmm. So technically, she would be included in this as well. So it seems that they're just saying Jace and Chandra here because they are the two who were in it from the beginning, I guess. Right. But it's a little disingenuous because there are other members of the Gatewatch.
Kind of weird.
And I guess technically, and this shows that Nissa is still not a member of the Gatewatch anymore, but I feel like the text in the beginning, even when Kaya is taking her oath, still has Nissa, like, confirming that it's okay for her to join. But, so, it's kind of talking... Weird. Yeah. I'll continue. Speaking of which, as the Gatewatch's newest member, Kaya aims to help right that future. In joining, she pledged an oath to protect the living and the dead. But now, that oath will be tested. The grieving guildmasters of Ravnica have tasked her with a grave mission suited to her talents as a hunter and assassin. A mission she is ordered to keep secret from the Gatewatch. She must track down and extract retribution on the traitor, Liliana Vess. Makes sense. Kind of, for part one, kind of a big part of it between her task of going after Liliana, Vraska's task of going after Dovin Baan, and Ralzeric's task of going after Tezzeret. That's kind of a big thread through this first part here.
But it's very convenient how they leave Liliana out of the beginning, acting like she was never part of the Gatewatch, and now all of a sudden she's just a traitor.
Right. She's not one of the former comrades of Liliana, or of Gideon. Not mentioned. But, and so here's the final paragraph, the third of three paragraphs on the back here. Note the word Forsaken. Don't forget it. But Liliana Vess has no interest in being found. Watch Amy's face for this one. Forsaken by her friends. She fled Ravnica after the defeat of Bolus. She was hostage to his wicked will, forced to assist in his terrible atrocities on pain of death, until Gideon, the last one who believed in her goodness, died in her place. Haunted by Gideon's final gift, and hunted by former allies, Liliana now returns to a place she'd thought she'd never see again, the only place she has left, home.
Because everyone and everywhere else knows who she really is.
Be nice. Self-censorship, everybody. Thank you, Amy. You know what she was going to say. Include that in your own minds. Amy, please continue your thoughts.
It's hard to move past that area. But in short, they know who she really is. So the only place she can go back to is the place that she lived when she wasn't that much of a crazy bitch.
Mm-hmm. It's funny to me, and I use funny ironically here. If I were a different person, if I weren't doing this show, if I weren't so interested in the future of the magic stories, reading the back of that book would make me very disinterested to read the rest of it. Because it says that she was forsaken by her friends. That's the title of the book.
And it's not true.
No, it's not. Because
she was trusted by people who considered themselves her friends because they didn't know the truth.
Yeah. So, again, as we said, we're not going to be 100% negative. We're not going to be 100% positive. There are aspects here. But if you want to consider that my quick review, that's the back of the book. That's before you've cracked the binding.
So yeah, I mean,
I would not.
I'm offended by just that.
Yeah, I would not blame a single person who read that, had known about the prior stories, and was like, "Nope, thank you, check please," and not being interested in purchasing it. I would get that.
There's so much distortion in each paragraph of that. And it just builds and builds and builds.
Yeah, I mean,
that first paragraph, I said, wait a minute. It doesn't mention Liliana at all being part of the Gatewatch, being somebody who earned the trust of her friends and then spat in all of their faces.
Well, but she did that. We knew that she was doing that purposefully from the beginning.
Right.
We knew that she was like, I'll join the Gatewatch because I'm going to need their help taking down my demons. And then once I've taken down my demons, who the hell cares? I'll kick them to the curb and it'll be fine.
Right.
And we all kind of knew, based on tropes as they are, that it would come to be that she would start off wanting to manipulate these people. She might succeed at doing so as well, but that along the way she would grow to love and trust them, and she did seemingly with all of them in their own way. I mean, obviously her and Jace had history prior. Her and Gideon developed history during, and her and Chandra had kind of a sisterly relationship. Excuse me. I think Nissa was the only one who just flat out didn't like her from the beginning, and that kind of didn't really change. It kind of existed out of convenience, their relationship, but there were never any moments, to my recollection, of genuine solo interaction between those two.
I wonder why Nissa's my favorite.
I mean, Ajani doesn't like her either, and Ajani's my favorite. Or at least Ajani, again, didn't have those one-on-one moments. But yeah.
Yeah.
Chandra was...
Liliana's an abusive piece of crap.
Right.
And that's all I can think about her.
Well, and again, Chandra was young and impressionable and she lost the strong, motivating mother figure in her life, in her mother, when she left Kaladesh. She gained it back in Mother Luti, aka Jaya, but was kind of rebelling against her because she was the teacher and Chandra was the student, and so there was a little bit of contention there.
Jaya.
Correct, but also, I mean, there was still a bit of contention there in terms of like, you're my teacher and yeah, you're trying to teach me stuff, but this is boring and whatever. But with Liliana was the bad influence. Liliana was the one who could tell Chandra, go do this kid stuff, go have fun, who cares? And Chandra appreciated being able to kind of pull that, at least at first. And then Chandra started her relationship with Nissa and became a little bit more grounded, if you will. And wasn't as easily manipulatable.
Grounded, because she's a green.
Oh, no, sure. Right. Yes. Rooted, even. Mm-hmm. God. Let's get a little bit into the meat and potatoes of the story. First of all...
Yeah, because I could talk about how much I hate that for the rest of this episode.
Well,
honestly.
let's stay with Liliana for a moment. Because in chapter 2, and I'm skipping a little bit, we'll talk about something else in a minute. In chapter 2, the book arguably tries to cater our expectations. And I don't just mean Joe and Amy. I mean Vorthos who are aware of the prior stories and who are aware of Liliana's prior characterization and who might have a problem with the fact that she is so drastically different in this story to what she has ever been previously, including even, I would argue, in War of the Spark Ravnica. And they try to cater that by using one throwaway line where it says that Liliana is not the same Liliana. Okay.
Prove it.
Sure. Right. Well, show don't tell is a thing. I've heard conflicting reports on show don't tell as to whether that is a fair thing or not, but I would argue that the rationale behind people not liking the concept of show don't tell is because not everything needs to be shown. If it is something that you just need your reader to know and you need to move on, then tell is fine. But if it's the characterization of what is arguably your main character or one of your main characters in this story and or going forward, you should probably work on the characterization more so than just saying, she's just different now.
I'm not even talking about show don't tell. I'm talking about you want to take a character that is a known abuser and change them into a redeemed character. You're going to have to do a lot. A whole hell of a lot.
And not even just
to prove to any of your fans that she's even close to as good as you're trying to make her out to be.
Especially those who know abuse. Who know the abuse that you're putting forth or put forth previously with that character. And I say you, it wasn't any of the people who are writing these stories that wrote Liliana in that way, but they wrote her that way for a reason. And to throw that away is disingenuous. We've talked about that many times. We've talked about the retconning, the ignoring of the source material, if you will, or the prior writings.
There's ignoring the source material and disrespecting the original art that existed. And then there's retconning. But that's different from this. This is
gaslighting.
A gut punch. Yeah.
Yeah. It's gaslighting.
It's gaslighting.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
It's a manipulation of your readers. Mm-hmm. The people who have already read the existing stories and the people who are going to read stories going forward and haven't read the previous stories. You are trying to change our minds about who this character is. And I don't appreciate it. I don't. Because you know why? Those of us who have been through that kind of thing, we don't like sitting here and getting told that it's not valid. And that's what you're doing. That's literally what you're doing.
Right, because you're trying to turn the abuser into a hero.
And you're trying to say, as a result of that abusers are heroes. That abusers can just change who they are at the drop of a hat because, and that the rest of us just need to deal with it. We just need to be okay with the fact that now those people who have ruined however many lives they've ruined are just good people now. And we just have to You're saying that what we've been through is not real. That's what this is doing. This is giving validity to what abusers do. And when that is a work of fiction or when it's a book or a movie or something like that, what that does is that changes people's minds in society. It affects the culture, okay? And that is moving the culture backwards. That is moving the culture in a direction that no one wants to go. And if you do want to go that direction, then you are the problem. You are. I'm sorry.
No, that's fair. And you know what? I would go a little bit further. We were talking about, and maybe I misspoke because I was the one that brought it up, talking about the fact that Liliana is attempting to be portrayed as the hero. I would actually, I'll go back on that. I think Liliana is attempting to be portrayed as the victim here.
Which is just as bad. Worse, even.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I agree. Because you're taking her actions and you're saying, well, all is forgiven now because, look, now she's sad. Now she is vulnerable. We'll talk about that in a bit. So this is going to be some odd transitions in this one. I apologize for that. To you as well. And to the viewers. Because there are heavier topics and there are lighter topics, but I do want to touch on some positives as well, because they exist. It's just that you can tell us, and we can say out loud if we feel, whether the positives are outweighed by the negatives, vice versa, or if they're about even. Something else that happened, talking about retcons or things that happened in the past that weren't really paid off. Excuse me. And it's possible that it comes up later in the story. But for this first part, it was like chapter 1, where we hear from Kaya. It's told from Kaya's perspective. And Kaya is basically, this is where she takes her oath. Or maybe this is the prologue then. But this is where she takes her oath. And she makes a comment, a passing comment, that now that Gideon is dead, Jace seems like the de facto leader. I'm sorry, what? That was such a huge plot point for years. That you had Jace and you had Gideon vying for that top spot, if you will. That leadership position, if there even was one to be had, or were they just kind of an actual collective, and that Jace could be planning when it came to overarching, but Gideon was the military guy, and so when it came to a war or a fight, sure, Gideon would be the one in charge there. But it was still a power struggle between those two characters. And now, from Kaya's perspective, someone who has not been there for all of the issues and situations,
Or
Kaya,
virtually any of them.
right, Kaya is the one who you have make the judgment call of, well, guess Jace is the de facto leader now, moving on.
Okay.
How long has that been a plot thread? And you throw it away with a line from Kaya. And like I said, it's possible that it comes up later. But so far, you have in the prologue, so really arguably before the story has even begun, and now for the first third of your story, you bring it up in the beginning and you never touch on it again, despite the fact that it was a topic, a plot thread for years. And so you just close the plot thread by having a character who just showed up to this group of people go, huh, guess it's that guy now. Okay, I'm satisfied. I'm not Kaya. What? I would be repeating myself if I continued to explain why this bothers me. Because there's nothing else to say. What else is there to say? With anything that either of us says today, we would love to hear your comparing or contrasting opinions. If you feel differently, we'd love to hear from you. If you're new to the show, we are not looking to say, this is the only opinion, there's no question. We would love to hear from and learn from each and every one of you watching. So please feel free to give us your opinions in the comments down below. If you want, please say whether you've read the story or not. Because your opinion is no less valid based on what we've said, but we would love to hear whether you've read this story or not, or whether you've read past stories as well, because I'd like to think that the things that I'm saying, just as the story said this, are factual, whereas then I follow it up with my opinion of why was there no payoff, why was it from Kaya's perspective, that kind of thing. So please feel free to give your opinions on anything and everything. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're here. Start a conversation and continue it down below. Okay. Amy,
Yes.
let's switch gears away from Liliana, away from the Gatewatch in general. Let's move to Teo.
Okay.
Teo was a character who was introduced right up here, in that one. And he continues in this book. And these, besides the parallel stories online from only from Rat's perspective, that's the only 2 times that we've seen Teo. And all of this is kind of happening within a day or two, right? Like, the War of the Spark, like, Teo shows up, the War of the Spark happens, and then this book continues it, and then they go to bed. So it's all within a day, essentially. That entire book.
Yeah. It's kind of...
And a part of the beginning of this book is all a day. But your point, having to do with Teo being on Ravnica,
Right.
was that he seemed to just know by the end of that day where he learned all of his new abilities.
Yeah.
Right? He went from not being able to put up a shield at all and almost
barely been able to.
right, and almost being buried to death in sand,
Right.
which caused his spark to ignite. And to being on Ravnica and holding off a god eternal. And saving, I don't know, a dozen plus people in the process. That's Teo's character arc. I think it was done quite well. It was brief, but we saw the moments of it. I just think we were told about it a lot, like where they were like, wow, he's getting better. Wow, he's getting better. It's like, you don't have to tell me he's getting better. He puts up a shield very quickly and...
Well, but they needed to do that because it didn't make sense.
But it did.
For him to get that much better, it didn't.
Maybe. There might also be, like, I just took it as, like, a surge of magical energy because he's a planeswalker. So he's just that much more powerful of a mage now because he's part planeswalker now.
All right.
That's how I took it. And to me, that makes sense. I didn't need Kaya to be constantly being like, wow, he has gotten a lot better since when I first saw him. Yeah, they're telling us that based on the vertices and the types of shields that he's putting up and all this other stuff.
At the same time, like, it doesn't even make sense for Kaya to have said that. If Kaya was with him for such a short period of time, she really shouldn't have had the context to know that he wasn't that good to begin with.
Maybe it was also Rat, to be fair, because she was with him literally from the moment he showed up on Ravnica at all.
Yeah.
So it could have been Rat as well. I may have misspoken. I think it was both of them, but more so with Rat,
well,
arguably.
Regardless.
That's fair.
The fact that this is such a short period of time, it really doesn't make that much sense for his skill level to have changed that much, and for anyone to understand how much it has changed from point A to B. Right.
Well, and you were also talking about his confidence level, because and I'd love for you to be able to expand on this if you want to, but at the beginning of this story, again, he's been on Ravnica for less than 24 hours. He has not slept since he showed up on the plane, and he is able to name all 10 guilds. He's able, or most of the all 10 guilds. He's able to name most, if not all, of the leaders of the 10 guilds.
Yeah, it's a lot of nonsensical stuff.
Yeah.
I think what they were trying to do is they were trying to say, like, look what a good ounce of confidence can get you. Look how people accepting you for who and how you are is able to allow you to blossom in the way that you ought to. But I still feel like that's such a long distance of blossoming in such a short period of time that it doesn't make sense, realistically speaking. But I think that's where they were trying to go with that, and that's a very sweet, cliche kind of thing for them to try to accomplish.
Yeah.
Without a lot of time and pages to do it.
Yeah.
So I partially get that. And I find it to be, and the writing around Teo as a character, I find to be refreshingly decent.
That's literally our next point as well, but please continue.
So I will say that I don't hate that that's what they chose to do. It just lacks a level of realism that I feel like it's owed, if that makes sense.
Sure. So let's stick with that, because the next two things that I wanted to talk about are Liliana based, but let's stick on this train of because there's one more thing about Teo, Kaya, Rat, etc. And that is that they were portrayed very well, arguably, in this first third of the story. All three of them.
Yes.
And also, there were moments when they were in Orzova, where Madame Blaze was a character as well, who was interacting with the trio, and those parts were fun and interesting and nice character moments, nice discussion moments, etc. And my hypothesis, if you will, for why that is the way it is, why it is so refreshing, why it's so nice, and it's a welcome change from everything else, is because 3/4 of those characters that I just named, Teo, Rat, Madame Blaze, and Kaya being somewhat of the outlier there, were all Greg Weisman original characters.
Basically, yeah.
They did not exist prior to Greg Weisman writing the stories, except for whoever
a little bit of Kaya.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying it's 3/4. And obviously there is influence through Wizards, but from what we've heard from past authors, if it's new characters that they're writing, even if they have ties to characters on the plane, for example, the twins in the M19 stories that Kate Elliott wrote, she mentioned that she got a lot of and she got a lot of free reign with those girls, and being able to write them the way that she wanted because they were her own creations and they weren't characters that had backstory before this author came in to write about them. So to us, it stands out when those parts happen.
Yeah.
It stands out when those characters are on screen, if you will.
Right.
Because it's much more free. Or right. It feels like Greg is much more free to write about them.
Right. There's a hominess to being in the story with those characters. Right. And because you feel like they belong there.
The relationships that they have with one another. It's important, and it shows. And it's really refreshing, because when you contrast it with the discussions we've had on Liliana, notice the tone change. Right? With Teo, it's like, oh yeah, it's cool. Like, here's maybe a little problem with it here or there, but the Teo stuff is nice, the Kaya stuff is nice, the Rat stuff is nice.
Right.
So, let's talk about Liliana.
Okay.
This is one point, and we have more to talk about. If you are trying to redeem Liliana as a character, whether that is appropriate or not, for this to be looked at as a positive, we would have to look at the fact that it is fine to try and do that. So we would
have to assume that is okay,
right,
as opposed to appalling.
For this portion of the discussion, let's go with that headspace if we can. if that is what you are trying to do with any character at all, it is good that in this story, when Liliana returns to Dominaria and is being confronted, harassed, whatever you want to call it, by the Raven Man, and the Onaki to a degree, but mostly the Raven Man, Liliana makes a comment that she recognizes that the Raven Man is preying on her while she's at her most vulnerable. That is a good contrast to an abuser if you are trying to redeem them, because they are recognizing what they have done previously is now what is being done to them. Now, Amy has a contrasting point to this that is very important to be made, but I am bringing it up somewhat as, and I see what you tried to do there. I get it. But once Amy makes her point, you all can decide which you buy, which you feel is valid, or is it somewhere in between? Do you remember? You need
Well, because first of all, if you're able to recognize that you are at your most vulnerable, then you're actually not at your most vulnerable.
Right. Because you still have your faculties about you to make that kind of, I guess, mental determination or whatever.
Maybe they meant the most vulnerable she's ever been, but that's also not true.
Right.
Because when her brother was dying and she turned him into a lich without realizing it, that's when she was at her most vulnerable.
Well, she was manipulated to turning him into a lich.
Exactly.
And was not aware that she was
did
vulnerable.
not realize it at the time.
No, you're absolutely
because
right.
she was at her most vulnerable.
Mhm.
If you are at your most vulnerable, then you're unable to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not at your most vulnerable. You're just vulnerable.
Right. So that's the
Which
kind
is
of
fine. They could have just said she's vulnerable. She's starting to realize that she's vulnerable, and she's starting to recognize the fact that the Raven Man is doing this to her. All of that would have made perfect sense, except for the word most.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it not true.
Right.
And the problem with not being careful enough with the words that you use is that if something is not true, then how do we trust that what you're saying is true?
Right.
Because we now know that statement is untrue.
Right.
Okay, so let's keep reading. How many more times are we going to have to second guess the things that you're telling us?
Right. And Liliana as a character, at least in the past, has not been able to be manipulated. I mean, again, early on, sure, as we just talked about. But when she's fighting her demons, like that fight with Razaketh that she was in, Razaketh tried to get in her head so many times and in so many different ways, and it just never worked. She just murdered him. Sure, she had to almost be mentally taken over by, zombie crocodiles or whatever, but she was able to do it. She wasn't right. Exactly. But she wasn't able to be manipulated. Same thing with the chain veil. The Onaki trying to get her to use the chain veil. It never worked. Same with the Raven Man. It never worked. So, sure, what has happened to her recently? Nicol Bolas arguably was able to manipulate her, but again, that was from the beginning.
Right.
When she first signed that contract.
She was vulnerable.
Right. And the most vulnerable because she was unaware of it. Or at least more vulnerable than here where she's at her most vulnerable.
Right.
That Bolas was able to manipulate her and came calling when she was at her strongest, if you will. When she had defeated her last demon and was free in her mind. It's, again, weird jumps. I apologize. But, still talking about villains, let's talk about Tezzeret and Dovin. They are two other characters besides Liliana who are being sought after for assassination.
Yeah.
by Veraska and Ralzeric. What I like...
Well, by the guild leaders, but yeah.
Right, tasking these people with it, yes. What I like that this book does is it gives us brief glimpses through individual chapters at Tezzeret, at Dovin Baan. And you get to see where they are, you get to see what they're doing, a little taste of their machinations, if you will. And then you get to follow the Planeswalkers in later chapters as they try to follow these villains. We know Dovin goes to Kaladesh. Later, the Planeswalkers go to Kaladesh. Oh, we just missed him. We know that already as readers. We know that he was just there. You just missed him because we just read about it previously. Right. That's nice. You give us a little bit of a taste of it, and then you go back to the Planeswalker's perspective. I don't think it would have been as interesting if the Planeswalker showed up and they were like, oh, well, this clue means that he was probably just here. Because then we could be sitting there going, no, he wasn't. Dovin's smart enough that he had a plan, whatever, right? He put that there to make you think he was just there. Right. No, we read it. He was just there. You just missed him. That's good. And that goes along with the fact, something else that this book does good, or does well. Does good? Oh, God. Ugh. Wow, I'm the worst. Another thing that this book does well, in my opinion, of course, is to have short chapters. In part 1, when we were reading through it, there was a night where we sat here together, and it got a little late. And we were like, well, let's read some of the book. And we read a chapter that was somewhat long, let's say. And then after that chapter, we looked at the next one, and we looked at the clock, and we were like, oh, this is a short chapter, let's do it. So we read the short chapter. And then the next chapter after it was a short chapter. And we were like, whatever, let's just read the short chapter after it. Oh yeah, there's another short one, let's just read that. Let's just read that. Let's just read that. It's like 3 hours later, 2 hours later, and it's like 11:30 and we have to wake up for work the next day. That's the sign of good structure of your story. Because if it's 11 o'clock at night and I see a 1.5-page chapter, I'm going to read it. If it's 11 o'clock at night and I see a 15-page chapter, I'm putting that book down and going to bed.
Yeah.
Because even if that chapter is well broken up and paced well, I'm not going to even venture into it because I don't have time.
Right.
But yet, if you give me 5 short chapters that equal 15 pages, right. Well, guess what? I'm going to be up till midnight reading those 5 short chapters.
Because you will have tricked us into continuing to read.
Correct. And that's not to say that books with long chapters are not good.
Right.
It's...
break up your chapters the way they make sense to break them up.
Correct. Storytelling is more important than story structure, maybe? I don't actually know that that's true. I just said that phrase.
Hand in hand.
Yeah. But
neither one can be good without the other one being good.
Fair. It's just something that I enjoy as a reader is being able to glance at the next chapter once I get to the end of one chapter. Glance at the next one and know that it's easy for me to read through that next chapter with whatever time I have said that I have. Right? If I'm like, oh, I'm getting a little tired, well, it's 2 pages, let's read it. And if I do that 6 times, I've just read 15 pages. Like I said, 12, 15 pages. I appreciate that. I like that. And again, these Dovin and Tezzeret chapters are examples of that, but there are a lot of different characters in this story, and that kind of leads us to something that Amy was talking about. We have the main Gatewatch characters. We have Liliana, somewhat separate from them at this point. Mm-hmm. We have the Rats of the world, the Teos, the Kayas, etc. And then we have other characters who may not have chapters told from their perspective, but we're still hearing from them somewhat often. Mm-hmm. Saheeli, Jaya, Ajani, Teferi, Karn. They're there, but they're not getting their own chapters.
Right.
But something that this book does, at least in this first third, that is a little odd, And of course, that's also not to count all of the guild leaders,
Right.
like Aurelia and I guess Hikara acting on behalf of Rakdos and
Because there are a lot
Lavinia
more,
and
there are a lot more in this book than Karn.
yeah, no,
you
that's
know?
fair. That's fair. And especially because they're the ones, as Amy said, tasking the 3 assassins, if you will, with their tasks of going after these other planeswalkers. But we hear about a character like JaAR, and then we don't hear about JaAR for like 4 chapters, maybe one of them being a bigger chapter, and then JaAR just comes back in again. The Wanderer comes back in again.
Right.
The guild leaders are there again. And again, you have this character name, and this character name, and this character name, and this character name, and this character name. And what was your point regarding that?
There's no cohesion to it. There's no flow of the through lines for each of these characters. They just randomly pop in and out of the story as if they're pivotal to it, but they're actually not, or as if they're not pivotal to it when they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
They're not given what a character is given. They're not given time. They're not given characterization. They're not given a setting even. They're just kind of dropped willy-nilly into story that exists as a way to propel that story that exists in the direction they want it to go without using the characters that they're using at the time. They're very auxiliary without it making sense for them to be auxiliary. Like, it feels like those specific characters should have more, and they just don't. And they're used as, like, extras in a movie.
Yeah,
even though that's not what they are supposed to be.
Which I think is the natural consequence of having this story have 36 planeswalkers, all of whom you have to name drop at least once.
Right.
If not multiple times when they show up, when they're talking in the guild summit thing that they had, or whatever you want to call it, and then when they are in the big fight at the end, and what kind of cool thing they're doing to kill Eternals. Because you need to give them, again, screen time, for lack of a better term.
But it's really just pointless cameos. It's really just a cluster.
Right, and it's attempted fan service that I would argue fails miserably.
Right.
So, again, this is less than that, because a lot of those planeswalkers whose names were thrown in as, hey, there's this guy with a mask and a dark cloak. We found out later his name was Davriel. No, you didn't. But you threw his name in there because he's a character who you made a card for in the set, so he had to be in the story. Congrats, you did it, I guess. And then later on you're like, he fights by doing this. Like, he killed them because of... I don't care. You had to do it because you felt like you had to do it. So the Davriels of the world, the Narsets of the world, they're gone now. Right? Or you get rid of them very quickly in this. Or you're like, oh, well, and then they planeswalk away. Okay. So you've gotten rid of some of them, but then you add in the guild leaders and the, I don't know, all the other random denizens of Ravnica who have names and titles and etc. that you're now bringing up pretty consistently, and you get fatigued. You being the reader get fatigued. It's just so many names. It's so much information to have to focus on and remember. It just is. And that's not a good, a bad thing one way or another. It's the nature of what this story has to be based on what they did by writing themselves into a corner with how many characters they had. Well, because you have to give them some time.
Well, and arguably, you said it was failed fan service. I mean, arguably, the fans would have appreciated more not hearing from a certain character for the improved result of hearing from a different character that they liked that had better characterization.
Right.
Longer or accurate
Right. I don't think the
characterization.
I don't think the Arlen Cord fans out there said, "Oh man, I'm so glad they used her name in the book."
Right.
Because if your hope was, "Oh, well, people are fans of different planeswalkers for different reasons, so let's have them all in this book or this set," you didn't have them all in the book. Sure, you mentioned Arlen Cord, but was she in the book? No. Her name was. If you get a digital copy of this book and you Control F and search for Arlen Cord, it'll sure be there. Will it have done any justice to the character whatsoever? No. Was it worth it? For the set, the card set? Yes. For the book? No.
Well, and that's the thing. It was their attempt at, the Avengers assembling.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when it's a visual media, seeing all of these people show up,
As
that's
cameos.
really cool.
Oh yeah.
But reading each of these names is irrelevant.
Yeah. And especially if it's just there as that name drop.
All you do is read these names and go, okay, so what? I don't care. Because there's nothing giving them importance. There's no validity to them being here. When you're seeing the scene of all of these people are fighting against all of these people, it's a little bit different. Because then you're like, oh, that's that person. That's that person. Oh, yeah, that person over there.
Right.
There's a lot more of a coolness to the fact that they're not reading off a list of names.
Yep.
They're not roll calling all of those people. They're not saying, hey, Valkyrie, you there?
Yeah. Look at that cool thing Valkyrie's doing.
Right. But, so getting to see Valkyrie do a cool thing is cool. But having to read attendance is not.
Yeah. And again, it really just feels like you're like, well, this is the obligatory Arlen Cord mention. Yeah. There you go, Arlen Cord fans. And you really think that the Arlen Cord fans are going to be like, yes, there she is. No.
They're going to be like, oh, well, I wish she actually got something other than just a name drop.
Yeah. Same with Ashiok.
Right.
What? Ashiok was there. Ashiok was in the set. Was Ashiok mentioned more than 2 or 3 times? I would highly doubt it.
Nope.
In fact, I'd probably put good money on it.
Yeah.
Okay. To go into a more in-depth character, Kaya. Let's go back to Kaya for a second. At a certain point towards the end of this first third, Kaya discusses her lineage, her background, etc., and somebody asks her about her last name. I believe this was when she and Tomek were filling out the paperwork, the contract that Tomek writes up to transfer the debts from Kaya.
Madonna.
Exactly. Solo name, Kaya, Madonna, Cher, etc. Yeah, and Tomek asks her last name, and she refuses to give it. And this is something that I have a bit of a problem with in terms of perspective. This story is being told from Kaya's perspective. At least this portion of the story, I should say. We have, it's either first person or third person omnipotent, where the narrator, if you will, knows Kaya's thoughts. So there's no reason for us as the reader, and this is a problem that I had with the first book and or the parallel fiction written from Rat's perspective. So maybe it's just the way that Greg Weisman writes, and I just don't appreciate this aspect. Mm-hmm. But something that I've noticed that bothers me a lot is if you're saying Kaya doesn't want to give her last name. Okay, but if we're in Kaya's head and we know everything Kaya knows, we know Kaya's last name. Kaya knows her last name. We should also know her last name. There's no reason, like outwardly she can say, I don't want to give my last name. But that doesn't mean that she's not going to immediately follow it up with, man, I really don't want anyone to know that my last name's Johnson, because if that gets out and they go to the plane that I was born on, they'll know that I'm a noble there, or a part of a higher up family. That would be what the character would be thinking about in that moment, because there's a reason why she's not giving her name. But
because it's Johnson.
I'm throwing a random name out there. That is what I chose. We should know it. And the only reason we're not being told it is likely because it's supposed to be a big reveal later. I'd rather not. We talked about this before. I'd rather not go into some of the reasons why this could be a big reveal later, because there's a lot of speculation in there that I'm not comfortable stating, because I could be very wrong and that's inappropriate for me to do. But I'll say that the only reason that we would not be able to know her last name today is if we already know someone with that last name.
Right.
Because then it would tell us something that the story writers or the story team at Wizards at that point is not comfortable with us knowing yet.
Right.
But there shouldn't be anyone who Kaya would be related to that we know already. There shouldn't. So there's no reason for us to not know her last name that I can see. Maybe I'm narrowly focused and I'm missing something obvious as to why they wouldn't want us to know it, but outwardly she can say she doesn't want Tomek to know her last name. There's no excuse in my mind for why we shouldn't know it.
Right. Except that they want a cheap,
reveal
big
later.
Reveal
Yeah,
later.
Absolutely. And that seems to be Wizards' MO. We talked about that.
Lately, that's what they're all about.
Yeah. We talked about that in our video.
Let's distract them with this big reveal of something that they really don't care about. But if we build it up enough, they'll decide to stop caring about the thing that they actually care about.
Right. Well,
spoilers, it doesn't work.
Well, Wizards likes to do that in general, where they are like, we haven't been able to talk about this thing that we've been working on for 3 years. Here it is. Aren't you excited? And like, for some things, yeah. But for others, no. Like, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. I'm not really going to fully get into it. Please feel free to go check out our The Magic Story problems video that we made 2 weeks ago. That is an entirely different animal from this. Okay, last thing. Speaking about Kaya. Amy, something that we were talking about and that you wanted to focus on. At the end of this first third, Kaya just reveals that she has an ability to take another person on a planeswalk with her.
Randomly.
Yes, for the first time ever, no prompting whatsoever, no precedent for it at all. But with Kaya's specific ability, she can phase someone and then take them on a planeswalk. And in this case, it's going to be Rat, because Kaya and Teo are going somewhere, and so Rat feels bad that she's being left behind, so they're taking her with them.
I was just, why are they leaving in the first place?
Well, Kaya's leaving, obviously, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, but does she have to do that right now?
Kaya does, yeah, that's her mission.
I mean, she kind of does.
But Teo doesn't.
No, there's no reason for him to leave right now, especially since it's only been like a day.
Yep. At least wait for Kaya to get back from her assassination mission.
Right. And then you can figure stuff out.
But Rat's like, oh, they're leaving. Why? Teo likes you. He clearly doesn't have anything to go back home to. Or if he does, let him go back home, explain where he's been, and then come back. Like,
right.
It's not that difficult of a concept. But they did it.
It really didn't make any sense. It really did not.
And that leads me to my point. And then this will be my final point, our final point for this video. That is a new rule. as far as I have knowledge of, right, we found out that Jiang Yanggu brings Mowu by turning him back into like a statue. And then holding the statue and planeswalking, because that is an inanimate object. And then you can animate the statue and then it's Mowu again. So you can, that's an easy way to explain away Mowu during the planeswalking aspect of walking the planes. This is a new rule that, to my knowledge, if there's an obscure story back there somewhere that I haven't heard of, please educate me. I would appreciate that. But to my knowledge, this is a brand new rule. That is not something that has ever been a thing before, is being able to take someone in some way across the plains. Maybe on the Weatherlight, right? Because the Weatherlight could planeswalk, and so people who were on the Weatherlight could, sure.
Okay.
That's fair. But
or maybe like using the planar bridge in some way, or like
no, the planar, that was the whole point. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
no,
you.
but I mean like maybe the only person that it makes sense to me that would be able to do something like that is like Saheeli Rai, because she would know enough about the planar bridge technology, or Tezzeret.
Right. But notice, even Tezzeret still had to send Lazotep-coded Eternals through, because then they were inanimate, arguably.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is a brand new rule. The other thing that we're hearing about is the Wanderer. The Wanderer is like, well, when people planeswalk away, you have moments before their trail goes cold and you can't follow them, but I can follow that trail later than most people. Later than anybody else.
Right.
That's another new rule for this new character. Okay, so herein lies the problem. Let's get meta for a minute, shall we? And this is why this is my final point. I feel like Jerry Springer. Here's my final thought. I don't know if anybody gets that reference, but
I do.
It's a bad one. I apologize.
It is.
Thank you for your support.
You're welcome. Happy to agree.
Good. There are many people, and I cannot say whether I am one of those people yet or not, although I am leaning in that direction, but I will make my determination when the book is done. There are many people who would say that they would rather this book and this book, or at least this book, War of the Spark Forsaken, were not canon. Were not a real thing.
Right. Or not considered to be an actual part of the story.
Now,
in the timeline of the story.
Now, I would argue it's kind of too late now. The set came out. The cards are released. The story is on the cards, and that's not going to change. The other aspects of things, like Liliana's redemption, that could arguably change, because as of yet, there is nothing that is affected by Liliana in that way yet. Because the Liliana card that we got from War of the Spark was the Liliana Dreadhorde General, and then there was Price of Betrayal, I think it's called. But whatever, the one where she's like dissipating and then Gideon sacrificing himself.
Right.
Those cards tell a story. But they more focus on Gideon, because then there's the heartwarming redemption card. They don't as much focus on Liliana. It is possible for these stories to be fixed. And I use the air quotes there because, again, I don't know that I agree with that sentiment yet. But there are people who have, not even would say, have said that they would like to ignore these stories canonically. If that's the case, what happens to things like this? What happens to Kaya's arguable evolution of her powers? She apparently has known that she could do this for a while, but we have not. So to us, this is an evolution. It is an increase in strength. What happens to that? What happens to the Wanderer and the Wanderer's ability to sense the trail that a planeswalker has left in their wake during a planeswalk longer than anyone else has ever been able to do in the past. If this book is to be ignored in terms of canon. Obviously, I don't have an answer to that question, so I hope that's not what you were waiting for. I apologize. I wish I had the answers. We'll have to wait and see. Because while there were a lot of people who had a lot of different problems with this book, the largest being the Chandra Nissa situation, which we will cover in a later review when it comes up in the book, this is where we're at. And Wizards and Greg Weisman separately have released apologies. But that's only around the Chandra and Nissa situation.
Yeah.
That is not around the book existing as a whole. So, and again, if you go back 2 weeks, you can watch our video of He Who Shall Not Be Named in this video. And that person has not said anything.
Well,
Because we haven't heard from that person in like 2 years. Because the last time we did hear from that person, we were told that we, as Vorthos fans as we existed, weren't good enough. We weren't, paraphrasing, we weren't making the company enough money.
Right.
So, here we are with this
He
book.
is.
Correct. But here we are.
Is trash.
Here we are. We are at the end of our review of the first part of 3, possibly more, possibly less, but our part 1 of 3 of War of the Spark Forsaken by Greg Weisman. I would love to hear your opinions in the comments about anything that we said, anything that we didn't say, down in the comments below. That's what they're there for. On a positive note, Happy New Year.
Yes.
We hope that you have enjoyed your celebrations of the holidays and the new year. Hopefully you're getting back into the swing of things, as we obviously are as well. Shameless plug, please check out our other channels as well. We didn't stop producing videos all throughout the holidays. We did release a channel update video last week, so please go check that out as well. It was a little long, but if you haven't noticed, we like to talk.
Yeah.
Mostly me. Rambling on as I tend to do.
I do too.
To a degree, yes.
It depends what we're talking about.
Exactly. That's fair. But this is the end of this part. I don't know how I feel yet. Like I said,
Right.
we discussed positives, we discussed negatives. I would argue that the negatives that we discussed here drastically outweighed the positives that we discussed here.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the positives that we discussed were related in some way to Greg Weisman, like his writing of the characters that he created and or the structure of the story in the way that they were written with shorter chapters and which kept you interested in reading all along the way. But the characterization, which is arguably the most important thing, was not great.
Right.
And the decisions that were made in terms of what to focus on and what not to focus on were not great. And while many people will be happy to not see Greg Weisman writing any more Magic stories, it means that a lot of the positives that we brought up in this review
Will be gone. Because the people that you really don't want writing the story will still be there.
right, they're the ones that are just always there, directing, if you will, the contracted
or
authors.
forcing the hand.
Right. So, for now, this will be the end. I would like to say that next week we will be back with part 2, but I cannot currently promise it. We are doing our best to make sure that we keep up with it. If it is not next week, we will have something next week, don't you worry. Likely a product opening of some kind.
Yeah.
But we will be back when we are done and ready to review part 2 with you all at that time. Please stay tuned to the channel. This is not, I promise you, this is not a rude or manipulative way of getting you to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because if you follow us on social media, you'll find out that way as well. I am not comfortable promising that we'll be back next week if we're not ready next week.
Right.
So please bear with us in that regard. We are trying our best to get through it, but to be completely fair, once we're done with this, and once we're done with the Wild Earth Quest,
We have no idea.
yeah,
It's up in the air.
right. And again, this is being filmed early. So if by the time this comes out, we had some kind of New Year's revelation, if you will, then great.
Reveal.
Yes. Then
Big
we will,
reveal.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. But you will find that out.
The same time we will.
Yes. And we will talk about it the next time that we are available to talk about it
Right.
with all of you. So for now, once again, thank you all so very much for watching. We would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below,
Please.
because for however many jars we are going to be able to continue to make, which we love to do, we would love to come back here, sit on this set, talk to all of you, and hear from all of you as we join each other in showing off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
We're going to keep doing it as long as we possibly can, while still being respectful to all of you and not wasting your time and ours. So,
Or at least attempting not to.
in the best way possible.
Right.
That is the end of part 1. Thank you all once again. This has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
Like I said, click around, check out these other things that are going to be on the screen. But for now, as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.